Going back down.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the November 16th, 2017 meeting of the Downtown Design Review Committee. It's currently 9:30 a.m. Let's begin with roll call.
Corey Bates.
Present.
Nathaniel Harding.
Present.
Charles Ainsworth. Anthony Blatt.
Present.
Betsy Brunstetter.
Present.
Julie Kriegel.
Present.
Connie Scothorn. Present. You have a quorum.
Okay. Does anyone on the committee have any potential conflicts of interest, or not necessarily conflicts of interest, any potential abstentions that they're aware of?
I will be abstaining for both of the items for individual consideration.
And I will
Was
be
Betsy
abstaining
Paula?
for item B.
Okay. I'd also like to make everyone aware that due to the Thanksgiving holiday, next week the meeting for MAPS has been moved to today in this room at 11 o'clock. So we do have a time constraint that we're working against. So ahead of all the presentations and comments, I'd please ask to keep your comments as brief as possible, and please be sure that if points have already been made and brought to light, to simply stay on the new points that you'd like to make. So I believe, assuming everyone's had a chance to review the minutes from last meeting, do we have any comments on last meeting's minutes? Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Move approval.
Second.
That was a Brunstetter-Blatt motion. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are approved. We have no cases withdrawn. We have no continuance requests. We have no items on the consent docket. So we'll move right into cases for individual consideration. The first item of which, 6A, 800 Northwest 9th Street. I believe the applicant is here.
Good morning. Recently, you all approved the building portion with a couple of conditions for this project. And subsequent to your meeting, they have submitted all of the additional information for the site that have been approved administratively. What you have before you today is they are wanting to install a freestanding sign, and due to the configuration of the street and the fact that the building is up on the property line where we want it on 9th Street, they are proposing to put the monument sign in the right-of-way, and for that they're going to need a variance. So that has to come back before you for a recommendation. So you can see where they're proposing to put it, and they're proposing to put it behind the sidewalk, between the sidewalk and where the property line is. Staff, in looking at this proposal, would acknowledge that the sign really needed to be moved forward so people would know where to turn into the property, as well as an identification for the building. And we had no objection. The landscaping the property is going to look like they own it all the way out to the curb because of how they're proposing to develop it. And staff is supporting their request, and we recommend that it be approved subject to the condition that they have to obtain a variance, as we have spelled out in your staff report.
Okay.
Okay.
Betsy, do you have any other comments?
Well, I was just going to, Paula has a few elevations, just so you're up to speed with what has happened since then.
Sorry. This mouse doesn't do what Paula told me to do.
Uh-oh. Technical difficulty.
So let me,
Good morning. I'm Betsy Brunstetter with ADG representing the applicant.
Okay, so this is what we showed you the last time. Do you have control?
I do, but it's not, I have to do it manually here.
Okay. This was the north elevation. We worked with the neighbors and came up with some different materials and a little bit of different configuration for those materials. Paula, can you go? So they wanted not as much glass on the north side, which really kind of brought it back down to more of a human scale, and I appreciate that change. And you want to go to the next one? So this is how it would look in perspective. And I just wanted to, there's not as much landscape because the city wanted more concrete around it, but still, this is pretty much, the materials would be plaster and the fiber cement board, and a little bit more of it on the north side.
This also shows the sign location that I wanted to point out.
Yeah.
It's very, very nicely, so you can see how it's kind of a flow from the building to the sidewalk. So it's not like it's between the curb and the sidewalk, because it's back from the street.
Yeah, that setback is really pretty far from the side, or from the curb. That's all. So I would love to have a recommendation for approval for the variance, if I could get that, please.
Do we have any comments or questions from the committee? Does anyone in the gallery want to speak to this? Do we have a motion?
I move to approve the application on the basis it complies with the regulations and guidelines of the Downtown Design District zoning ordinance, refer to section C and D of staff report, with the condition that the applicant obtains a variance from the Board of Adjustment from the prohibition against signs in the right-of-way.
Second.
That was a Harding-Kriegel motion. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
I'd like to also move to provide a recommendation of approval to the Board of Adjustment for a variance from the prohibition against signs in the right-of-way.
Second.
Again, Harding-Kriegel. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Application is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the second item for individual consideration, item 6B, 601 West Main Street. Is the applicant present?
This is a new parking garage proposed on the site. The committee heard a different proposal on a similar project in August and September, and the project in September was denied, and it is being appealed. But in the meantime, the applicant is proposing a new design. It's a parking garage with ground floor lease space. It is a one-story shorter than the previous submittal and has a completely different architectural character on the north and south facades. Staff found in our issues and considerations, we pointed out the use of precast concrete is not explicitly allowed in the guidelines, but there are provisions for the committee to provide alternative materials. There's also potentially still a consideration about the relationship of the height in relationship to the surrounding buildings, specifically the smaller building to the east. There is a minimum height and story requirement for this site. It's 3 stories or 50 feet, so that's required. And I'll let the applicant describe it from there.
Thank you. I'm Scott Dedman with ADG, 920 West Main, and I'm representing TBL Parking. Going? All right, just some background on the project. It is 13,000 square feet of ground floor commercial space, and it fronts both Main Street and Colcord. We now have 4 elevated parking decks above the commercial space. The previous submittal was 5 elevated floors. And we have 207 parking spaces now, which was reduced. And those parking spaces are for the private vehicles of the police association members, and the police association members are made up of officers, civilian employees, driving their private cars to work. It also has space for monthly parking and for visitors, and some limited public parking in the garage now. We also, again, we are using precast concrete, which is typical for parking garages. On the facades on the north and the south, we're using brick cladding. It would go from actually brick and CSMU, which CSMU is a simulation of a limestone material, a manufactured limestone material. So we'd be using that from ground level to parapet level. And then to conceal the parking, we're using a powder-coated metal grill. And then on the east and the west, again, is a painted precast, a coated precast panel. Wrong way here. So the site is adjacent to the Civic Center. It faces the Channing Drive on the north and Dewey Avenue on the south, and then it sits between Colcord and Main Street. I want to talk about the ordinances and the guidelines, because the ordinances and the guidelines are really important to architects. This is what we rely heavily on giving advice to our clients. It tells us what building or what uses can be used on their property, what heights can be used, what their setbacks are, multiple things, and we rely heavily on that information. Most of the things in those guidelines are pretty black and white. There are some things that are subjective, and that's really what we rely on the staff and on you guys to make those decisions, on aesthetic decisions, on whether a building meets context and is aesthetically appropriate or not. And so we rely heavily on your input back to us on that. I think one thing I would say, our firm, ADG, we have worked successfully in all of these districts in Bricktown, downtown, Midtown, all of these through this system, and we understand the system. The other thing we do is we look at previous projects that have been approved as well, and that really helps to set what is acceptable to the committee. So we look at that as aesthetic guidance as well as input from staff until we can present something to you all. So if you'll bear with me for just a few minutes, I would like to go through basically what we look at when we're looking at the zoning ordinance, when we're talking to a client for the first time. And so one of the first things we do is go to Chapter 59 of the zoning ordinance and look at the requirements of the site. So in the bulk standards, we're in the DBD. We have no maximum height limitation on this site. We have a 3-story or 50-foot minimum height regulation on this site. And then the first 2 floors of new constructions need to be within 10 feet of the property line. So these are things we try to follow to make sure our projects meet these, and this is what we tell our clients. The other things is what are the appropriate uses? So we look in the DVD, automobile parking garages is a permitted use on this site. We have the guidelines to follow as well, the framework, and so we look at that. Our site is in the commercial district, and there are some comments in the district that are appropriate to this, and one of them is that whatever we do helps set the expectations for future development in these areas. So this development helps set what the future is for that area, the size, the density, the work like that. And from the framework, we look at the commercial corridor zone. The recommendation is 3 to 5 stories with ground floors that are primarily for commercial or retail use or office use. And we look at the compatibility matrix of the typology, and so look at single-use parking garages in the commercial corridor is fully compatible. So I think the land use kind of speaks for itself. We also look in the commercial frontage area in the downtown design work or framework. It talks about ground floor or parking garages with the ground floor having commercial space. I think we obviously meet that. And then also, I think one thing that's interesting in the illustration that's given in the framework, talking about a commercial zone, one of the things they show is obviously a parking garage as a part of that framework, as part of the illustration. And we look at the future development plan that talks about the mixed density areas. And it specifically calls out mixed use areas, specifically calls out 3 to 5 stories. And then again, as you look at this, it talks again about ground floor commercial at parking garages. It specifically talks about the use of spaces of mixed uses as parking, as acceptable in a mixed-use area. And again, in the illustration, it shows a parking garage with ground floor retail and a screening on that. And we're also in the Civic and Arts District. And the key there, I'm sorry, I jumped too quick, is the number of stories, where we have 3 stories, a minimum of 3 stories height. So I think even between the ordinance and the framework, it's clear that the desired height is at least 50 feet or at least 3 stories in this area. So looking quickly at the plan, I know you guys have seen this before, but we have 13,000 square feet of retail or of commercial space on the ground floor. We have ramps that lead up to the parking decks above. Have an entry that centers on Dewey Avenue. The building lines or faces Channing Drive in front of the Civic Center. And we do provide a public corridor that connects between Main Street and Colcord. On the typical floor, we're 55 spaces, again totaling to 207 spaces. And then now, in the current design, we are right at the 50-foot minimum on the south side, facing the Civic Center, and then 56 feet 8 inches facing Main Street. And talk about the inspirations a little bit. Of course, we, in all of the districts, we're looking at the context of the districts to make decisions on our projects. Maybe the last one was a little too contemporary. We were looking at designs that related to the park, the new park, and also designs that reflected back to some of the more abstract features of the Civic Center and some of the Art Deco buildings. This one is a much more traditional design, as you'll see. So again, looking at some of the civic buildings, we see City Hall and the county courthouse. Again, I think one of the unique elements, of course, is the limestone, but also the aluminum grill work, which is applicable to our project. So we're looking at our project using a blonde brick. On the Colcord side, that would match the Civic Center. This is the same brick we used on police and courts. Then with bases and trim pieces of CSMU. Again, this is the material that was used on police and courts that matches the limestone appearance. And then the metal grill work would be a powder-coated finish like this that would help to screen the parking of the cars. And that grill work really picks up, again, the patterns that you see, that you start to see in some of the grill work on City Hall, on the courthouse, on the Civic Center. In this image, you can see the painted party walls, and again, the party walls are utilitarian. I mean, that's typically the way the party walls were done in downtown Oklahoma City. We cannot have window openings because of the fire regulations, that those have to be solid walls. So we have the painted concrete party walls. Now we have put we do use a pattern of recesses that sort of emulate windows along that party wall to break up the solid nature of those panels. Of course, you can see the fifth level. It's referred to the fifth floor a lot, but it's actually the roof of the building. So it's essentially a 4-story building with a roof that you can park on. The metal screens that conceal the parking levels, and then the street-level commercial underneath a canopy. Now, again, like I said, we look at other projects that have been approved. For examples, of course, the Arts Center garage that looks out onto the City Hall park. Again, it uses the architectural metal screens with the street-level commercial, which are both things that have inspired this project. A shot of that at night showing the lighting as well as the street-level commercial space. And then a shot of the 601 project at night. We're utilizing light columns, LED light columns, to just help accent that column line that would come through the building and to break up that facade. Again, you can see the street-level commercial. You can see it in relationship to the Civic Center. So again, a story lower than what was previously shown, and again, a more traditional aesthetic that blends with the Civic Center. We also looked at the buildings on Main Street. I think that was of some concern because it is primarily red brick buildings along Main Street on that side. So on our Main Street side, we've made a change to a red brick that would be more in keeping with the buildings on Main Street. So the other details would remain the same. So really, keep going the wrong way. Kind of in conclusion, so what we're doing is we're really providing a more expensive solution to parking in this area. Surface parking lots are by far the least expensive way to go. We've got plenty of surface parking lots in that area. So by going vertical in a garage, we're actually reducing the amount of surface parking by almost a square block, opening up land, conserving land, making it available for further development. We feel like this design reflects the character of the Civic Center and the Main Street buildings. It activates the street level with commercial space on both sides, both Colcord and Main Street, and it provides parking for the police association members, for their private vehicles, monthly commercial parkers of the commercial space and possibly other buildings in that area, and then also convenient event parking for the Civic Center. And this is kind of the final image that we've got. So I would be happy to answer any questions you might have on this proposal.
Do we have any questions from the committee for the applicant? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Is there anyone from the gallery that would like to speak to this?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Eric Groves. I'm an attorney. I represent John Michael Williams. This morning I want to talk to you a little bit about the law that applies to this case, but before I do, I want to call my one and only witness to address you on this subject. But before I do that, I want to hand out some extra exhibits. You all have in front of you an exhibit book that we prepared, but in addition to that, I would like to hand out some other copies, and I would ask you. What you are receiving now is something that we'll discuss in the course of our presentation. I just didn't want to interrupt it by handing it out later. I'm pleased and proud to represent John Williams. I think you all know who he is. He's officed on that park for the last 33 years and is committed to it. So, John?
Good morning, John Michael Williams, 522 Colcord Drive, Oklahoma City, which has been my address since 1982. And I'm purposely going as quickly as possible, realizing the time constraints. We all have neighborhoods. We have neighborhoods that we live in. In some cases, we have neighborhoods that we work in. This is my neighborhood. It's been my neighborhood since 1982. And when one's neighborhood is experiencing the prospect of adverse development, responsible neighbors speak out, responsible neighbors engage lawyers to represent them, to try to bring to your attention the difficulties and the problems associated with a 5-story parking garage at this particular location. Now, here's the problem. The problem is, and you've heard this before, but I'm abbreviating it this time, when you look at the elevation of the property, what you see is, in the upper floors, you see automobile headlights looking out into the park. And automobiles themselves aren't bad, but those automobile headlights should be the two eyes of human beings who live up there. This is a particular location that cries out for develop me as a residential area and benefit all of the city of Oklahoma City, at least the downtown portion. Now, toward that end, I discussed this with Gary Brooks, a developer of residential projects in downtown Oklahoma City and in Bricktown and in Midtown, and he's actually out of the country today, but I have a very brief message that he would like to have read to you, that he's authorized that I read to you. Again, this is from Gary Brooks. I'm opposed to the proposed parking garage on the south side of Bicentennial Park. as the developer of hundreds of residential units in Midtown and Bricktown, including the Edge and the Steel Yard, with development now underway on the residential units in the First National Center. I am keenly aware of the importance of location to the success of residential projects. This parking garage is proposed to be constructed on property that is one of the best locations for residential development in all of downtown. This is because of its frontage on the Bicentennial Park and its proximity to Civic Center Music Hall. Bicentennial Park is a unique community amenity like no other. Property fronting on the park should be developed for residential and office purposes, along with restaurants and other services for residents. It should not be used for a parking garage. Because of its location, there will be much competition among developers to have the chance to develop this property for residences. Please do not approve the parking garage, but allow the property to be developed for residences. Respectfully, Gary Brooks. The park is a scarce resource. The underdeveloped property around the park is a scarce resource. Please preserve it for residential and other development and deny this parking garage in my neighborhood. Thank you.
For the record, Eric Groves again. I'd like to point out to the committee the exhibits you have before you. They're not given to you to read. They're given to you in case you want to make reference to them in the course of this debate. Exhibit 1 is the application in question. Exhibit 2 is the staff report. No doubt you're familiar with both of those, but in case you need to look at them, they're here. Number 3 is the Downtown Design District Ordinance, which is an important factor in your decision. Number 4 is the City Council resolution that adopts the Downtown Development Framework, and it also includes Section 4.2, which deals with scale and massing, and Section 4.2b, which portrays the design sub-district map. Exhibit 5 is a page from your bylaws of this committee. It's page 1. And Exhibit 6 is a copy of the petition and protest. As I said in my brief, which I hope you had an opportunity to read, nearly everyone, with the exception of one landowner around this park, has signed this protest petition. Everyone is opposed to it. This is a zoning matter. Our city code divides land within the city into different districts. We follow the traditional method known as the Euclidean zoning method of having R districts, C districts, O districts, I districts. But we have gone beyond that traditional structure in a way because now we have what we call special zoning districts, which are custom tailored to particular areas. In this case, we have the downtown business district, and this property is within that district. It is a special zoning district, but like all zoning districts, it has allowable uses or permitted uses, or what we lawyers call uses of right. But there is another district, and it may not technically be an overlay district, but it certainly functions as one, and that is the design district. So you can imagine that if you just take a horizontal plane, that is the basic zoning district, which is the DBD, but there's another layer on top of that, and that is the design district. And that is what you are charged with administering and enforcing. We've had these kinds of districts for a long time, actually. By way of example, I live in Edgemere. It's a historic preservation neighborhood. For a long time, my land was owned R1. But then we put a district on top of the R1, the HP district. And that had other requirements in addition to those imposed by R1. And, of course, they had to be enforced, and we have a commission who enforces them. Now, everything's just HP, but originally we had one zoning district and then another district above it. That's what we have here. The interesting thing about the design district that you administer is that its requirements are stricter than the requirements for the basic underlying zoning district. And those rules are set out in the ordinance, which I have provided in the exhibit book. The guidelines state as their purpose, and this is critical, I think, to your deliberations, that compatibility of use must be found in order to approve an application. Now, there has been debate among the lawyers in this case as to whether this committee has jurisdiction over use or simply design. Well, it's not a black and white question, but one thing is certain. You do have jurisdiction over the compatibility of use because the law says you do, and your own bylaws say you do. We are not attempting to say that this zoning district should be changed by this committee. This committee doesn't have the power to change the zoning district, but it does have the power to say that a particular contemplated use is not permitted because it is incompatible. If those who argue, as I think my opponent in this case has done, that simply because a garage is a permitted use, that they can have it, not exactly. The district that you administer is a filter of sorts. It's a yes, but kind of ordinance. It says, yes, garages are permitted by law, but only if they meet the higher standards of the design district. Now, what I've handed you exhibit number 7 is a photocopy of the chart for the permitted uses in the downtown design district. Now, if the argument were to be made that applicant can have a garage simply because it's permitted use in the district, then the same thing would be true to other permitted uses in that district. And I thought it might be helpful if we reviewed a few of them. If you look at the second page, you could have an animal kennel in this district. And by the way, on the chart, you'll note to the left-hand column is the number of the use unit, which of course is a description of a particular kind of use. 8300-22, bingo parlors. You could have a bingo parlor on the park under the theory advanced by the applicant. Here's a good one. 8300.32, convenience, sales, and personal services. So there's no doubt about what that means. I also photocopied the use units, and that's the other exhibit, Exhibit 8. What that means is that someone could apply to have a convenience store on the park. And according to the theory of the applicant, all you could do was deal with its design, not whether it's a compatible use. Surely no rational person would want to see a convenience store on Bicentennial Park. Worse yet, if you turn to the next page, use units 8300-.34, 35, and 36, 3 kinds of eating establishments: drive-ins, fast food with drive-through order window. You could have a Sonic there if you were not the guardians of how this law is to be administered. You could have a gas station, 8300.46. There are other uses. You could have personal storage. Look at page 53, 8300.60. You could have storage units on this park if you weren't here to stop it. Now, surely, common sense dictates that those kinds of uses are not compatible with this setting. And you would have the power if someone came along and said, I want to build storage units, I want to build a convenience store, I want to build a gas station. You could say, no, that is not a compatible use. And that is what I think needs to be done today. You know, I've done a lot of thinking about this because, like John Williams, I'm invested in this. You know, John and I have spent a lot of years serving this city in one way or another. And if John hadn't hired me, and someone just came and asked me, Groves, what do you think about this parking garage? I'd say, no, no, no. It is against everything that we've tried to do in this district, everything we've tried to do with this park. This is a memorial park. There are other workable locations for this garage, not on the park. Now, this committee turned down the previous application. This one is not all that different. All they've done is reduce 6 stories to 5 and change the frontage to a different design. That's all. It's still out of scale. It's still out of context. And I got to say one other thing. This business about precast concrete. You know, the ordinance doesn't list precast concrete as an allowable exterior building material. Now, I've heard excuses from staff and from the applicant as to why you should make an exception to that. Call me old-fashioned, but as a lawyer, I think the law should be followed as it's written. And I just don't see that on the list. So I urge you to follow the law as it is written, and that gives you jurisdiction to decide, is this a compatible use or not? And it most certainly is not. And many, many people who are heavily invested in this area concur. That's the presentation for John Williams.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the gallery that would like to speak to this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Kelly Work, and I am an attorney representing Dennis and David Box and their real property companies that own property that fronts on the park and that is in this immediate area surrounding the subject property. We oppose, my address is 105 North Hudson, Suite 304, Oklahoma City. We oppose this revised application of the applicant and request that it be denied. Dennis and David Box own the property that is located at 529 West Main, which is immediately adjacent to the subject property and is occupied with the one-story building that is devoted to retail and office use. They also own the property that's immediately adjacent to it that fronts on the park, and they own additional property that is at the southwest corner of Dewey and Main Street, just south and west from the subject property. And Dennis and his wife Chris own and live in a residence that is addresses on Colcord Drive and fronts on to Bicentennial Park. In a few minutes I will call on former Oklahoma City Planning Commissioner Nick Gales, who has reviewed the application and has some comments that he would like to share with you. And then also City Councilman Pete White, formerly a Ward 4 councilman for many years. Before I do that, though, I want to call on Richard McCowan and we asked Richard to review this revised application and share with you his observations about it and about the context in relation to the park and the surrounding area. Richard McCown has been involved as a developer on a number of successful urban projects in Oklahoma City, mixed-use projects, and I think his comments will be interesting. Richard?
Richard McCowan, 30 Northeast 2nd Street in downtown Oklahoma City is our office location. I'm glad Eric mentioned bingo parlor, because I've been trying to think of some of the other uses that could bring activity to the park all throughout the day, as well as residential. And I'm a residential developer. We do other types of mixed-use development. But residential development is certainly the thing that this space calls out for, as was mentioned in the letter from Gary Brooks. And I have to say that we have 325 urban apartments downtown, and I really am not wanting another fabulously located residential project that I have to compete with, but it's the right thing for the city. It's the right thing for this location. And I want to take a minute to talk about, why that is. Why, what are some of the unintended consequences if we don't do a residential development here, God forbid a bingo parlor. But we're right now, as the Urban Land Institute Oklahoma City chapter, we're doing a book club, and we're reading and rereading, in some of our case, Jane Jacobs' The Death and Life of Great American Cities. It's a really great book, and I'm sure many of you have read it, but she talks in great detail about a couple of things that are very relevant to this location and this context. She gives a fantastic description of 4 parks in Philadelphia that are all equal distance from City Hall. And she describes the park that has only cultural uses around it, and it's basically quiet and empty, and therefore no one goes to the park except, in the 1950s parlance, the bums hang out in the park and everyone's scared to go there. And then she describes other parks that only have office users around them, and again, people aren't willing to go there. But then she describes Gramercy Park, and she describes it very meticulously throughout the day in a time sequence. In the early morning, you've got the people walking to work that stop in and get coffee that are in small stores, and then in the mid-morning, you've got the mothers taking their children to school and then bringing back their other preschool-age children that they're still at home and they're playing in the park, and then you've got the older retired folks that come into the park. And she describes this all the way throughout the late evening when you have the young adults that are coming into the park, and it's a place they're hanging out on after going to dinner on a date. And the park is busy and active and vibrant throughout basically 18 hours of the day, and it's safe, and it has eyes on it, and it functions and it works. She also describes other parts of Boston, where I went to graduate school, where cultural islands were created, and certainly we have one here. We have this wonderful building, which I love coming to, but I only come here for occasions like this. It's not a building I don't come here for lunch, I don't come here to see a friend that lives on the top floor. This is a special use building. I go to the Civic Center a lot, but only when there's a show. It's not a place that we frequent, and so we don't have this natural time scale of people living in the park, or living on the park, interacting and making it animated all throughout time. And that's where you end up with these cultural islands. Another example she gives is the Lincoln Square Center in New York City. I was there over spring break. And it's kind of amazing. The lack of housing in that whole district in New York makes it pretty quiet. When you're walking to go visit some of the universities that are near there, you're all alone. It's not a vibrant, mixed-use neighborhood. It's an isolated, kind of quiet neighborhood. It's slowly changing, but there was so much big investment made when the Lincoln Center and the institutions were put in place. You feel lonely on the street, and it's very different than other experiences you get in other cities where there's this vibrant mix of activity that keeps the street busy all throughout the waking hours, so to speak. The other thing that I said the last time we looked at this is it's essentially a suburban building. Buildings like this are what enable me to live in North Norman and drive in and use the city and go to the Civic Center and go back home. If we put residential here, then you begin to say, well, what if, it wasn't quite so easy to just drive in and use the city for a couple of hours? What if I actually wanted to be neighbors with these guys that have been in this neighborhood for all this time and be down here and participate in the great exchange of ideas? Cities that have urban walkability, and this dense mixture of mixed uses produce a disproportionately high percentage of patents per capita as compared to cities that are suburban and sprawled out, like Phoenix, Arizona. Huge city, but people don't interact in these chance encounters and the walk on the sidewalk where ideas are exchanged, and those are the engines that drive cities and drive innovation. We battle every day to try and keep young people in Oklahoma. We don't lose, when somebody gives us their notice they're moving out, it's not to move to a competitor's apartment up the street. It's to move to Austin, Texas, or Seattle, or some cooler city that has great places, places that people want to live because of this vibrant exchange of ideas. It's so hard to have that vibrant exchange of ideas stuck in a traffic jam, trying to get out of a parking garage, onto the boulevard, onto I-40, or onto the Parkway or I-35. We're just in our bubble. And the great machine that drives the city and drives innovation isn't available to us. I think the important thing here is to think about, we've made a $5 million investment in this park as a city, and we can either choose to, right, way too many notes up here. In the interest of being brief, I'm trying to get through them, but we can either choose to look at this park as this incredible asset that can attract the kind of development that builds on the success of Oklahoma City, or we can turn it into what essentially is a self-storage unit for our temporary storage of our cars, so that we just come in and use the city and then abandon the city throughout those other 22 hours of the day, and the park, and lose that opportunity to put eyes on onto this park, to make it a wonderful and safe place that we want to go to and that we feel comfortable in. Recently, I got to be part of a delegation from here in Oklahoma City that went to Anchorage, Alaska, and then even more recently, Brent Bryant and I were asked to come to Albuquerque, New Mexico, to talk about bringing housing to their downtown as well. And when we were in Anchorage, Alaska, that's what they wanted, is how do we make our downtown functioning and vibrant? And we visited a parking garage. I remember standing on the top floor in December in Anchorage at 17 degrees out, no sun shining, and it was terrifyingly cold. And we were standing up there talking about how to put housing retrofitted into this parking garage, because the parking garage was one of their biggest problems in their downtown. And it was right next to City Hall, same adjacency we have here. And it was regularly said that, and I said this last time, this is a terrible story, but the mayor had a big glass window behind his desk, and he would see a horrified look at somebody sitting across from him because there's someone having sex in the stairwell behind him in the parking garage. There's no one living down here. You end up with a parking garage that becomes a place where, who knows, the irony of that is the police association creating a parking garage that is the kind of building that becomes a magnet for not good things to happen. It's a mismatch of intention. I also think that there's a generation that carries this idea that apartments are somehow a negative. There's an idea that renters are, a sub caste, if you will, as compared to the suburban homeowner. And the reality is, the people who are moving back downtown are they're very well financed. These are people who are the movers and shakers who aren't. This isn't the 1980s crime series of urban decay and downtown housing. This is upscale by the very nature of it being downtown, because it's a competitive environment. If highly educated people want to be down here to participate in this great exchange. And it's important. It's really important. And it goes the complete opposite direction of having something like this. So I think If we talk about the need to create a great walking culture and build on the success of the MAPS projects and what we've done here in Oklahoma City that has brought 42 different cities to Oklahoma City to ask, how did you do this? How did Oklahoma City do this amazing turnaround over the last 24 years through MAPS, through our TIF funding? How's Oklahoma City done this? And it's through making a series of really great decisions to try and make investments in our public property and then encourage development to take place that reinforces those investments. And we can't allow ourselves to take a step back. And that's really critical and important. In another book, Jeffrey West's book, Scale, he's looking at the science of cities and the mathematics of it. And cities that were doing poorly in the 1960s are still doing poorly today. Super cities that were doing very well in the 1960s are doing even better today. If you look at where we were in the 1960s and our policies and what we were doing, we can't afford to slide back to that trajectory. We've had an incredible miracle of a 24-year turnaround since we did MAPS, and we've got to continue to build on that to become the kind of city that young people and talented people, the creative class, want to come and work here. And we have to do everything we can. My recommendation is this, as Gary Brooks said in his letter, is that this would be housing. A bingo parlor would be far better than this parking garage to bring people here on a regular basis and create activity so that the park is a vibrant and active place. I think housing's a better choice than a bingo parlor, but this parking garage, of all the items listed, does the least. In fact, it does the most damage to this park as a public good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Mr. Groves made reference to it, but I just wanted to call to your attention the map that shows the surrounding property owners that have protested this new application for a 5-story parking garage. A smaller version of this was provided to you all with the protest petition that was filed with the staff, but it just illustrates the subject property is shown in red, and all of those properties that are highlighted in blue on north and south of the park are property owners who have invested in this area and who have protested and are opposed to this proposed application for a 5-story parking garage at this site. One of the guiding principles of the downtown framework that sets forth the guidelines for this committee to review as it considers applications is that the development must be context sensitive. This proposed 5-story parking garage does not comply with those guidelines. It would be out of character for the area. It would detract from the existing structures that are there in this 2-block area between Walker and Lee and between Colcord Drive and Main Street. It would discourage the type of mixed use and residential development that is needed and desired for this area around the park, and it would detract from the park, from the Civic Center, and from the City Hall buildings. The third guiding principle that is set out in Section 4.2 of the design framework is return on investment. And it states that the city has made significant infrastructure investments downtown, which include the park, the Civic Center, and City Hall in this immediate area. And what the framework desires, according to its language, is a corresponding concentration of activity so that there is a return on that public investment. With respect to this area around the park, what that means is that we want to encourage, as a city, developments that will contribute to making the park an active gathering space. And a 5-story garage to store cars will not contribute to that concentration of activity that the framework desires. For this area surrounding the park, what is needed is the maximum amount of commercial and pedestrian activity so that you do have the park serving as an active gathering space and realize its full potential. The existing buildings that are on the north and south sides of the park range from 1 to 3 stories, and there are a number of residences that are included, mixed in with those. The Civic is a new residential development that has recently been constructed on the north side of the Civic Center, and there is certainly the potential for significantly more residential and mixed-use development in this area around Bicentennial Park, which would more appropriately make the park an active gathering space. As the staff previously reported, the Civic Center and the City Hall buildings are, of course, historic in nature and are significantly important buildings for Oklahoma City, and they need to remain the focal points of this area. This proposed application will detract from that in our view. The recent renovation of the Main Street Arcade just to the west of this subject property is an example of the type of development that is happening along Main Street. It's lower in scale, it preserves the historic character of the area, and also preserves the red brick materials that predominate along Main Street. The guidelines state that their purpose is to encourage appropriately scaled development and to promote context-sensitive development. And by way of example, the guidelines cite a building that is too tall for its surroundings as not being context-sensitive and therefore not appropriate. This application proposes a 5-story parking garage at a location where none of the buildings within this 2-block area on the south side of the park exceed 2 stories. This proposed project, the 5-story garage, is not sensitive to the character of the area. It would adversely impact the park and would detract from both the Civic Center and City Hall. The proposed precast concrete walls that would be facing both for the east side and the west side would detract from the Civic Center and City Hall buildings as the appropriate focal points. It is simply not an appropriate location for a 5-story parking garage. If it were to be erected there, it would deter the type of development on the surrounding property around the park from the type of mixed use and residential development. So it is and will have an impact on the future development and would detract from what is needed and desired if it were allowed to be developed at this location. I want to also just reference that to reemphasize a point that Mr. Groves made, and that is that this committee does have the legal authority and the discretion under the guidelines to decide whether or not this proposed 5-story parking garage as proposed and designed is consistent and compatible with and appropriate to this specific site. and we suggest to you that it is not consistent and not compatible, and ask that you deny it. At this time, I'd like to call on Jim Loftus, architect, and ask him to make a few comments about the revised application.
I'd like to make everyone aware that the current time is 10:35, and state a general reminder to please limit your comments to those that have not yet been made. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members, and staff. I come before you today in opposition to the proposal by the Police Association to build a 5-story parking garage to house 207 automobiles. My focus is directed at the big picture planning issues which are at play here. My premise is that this proposal is not the best option for the association nor for the citizens of Oklahoma City. Let's look at the options available to the association. They propose a 207-space garage with 2/3 of the capacity reserved for police vehicles. I would suggest that the recent tax increase for additional police will increase the demand for dedicated spaces to where little parking is available to the public. This proposed solution, some 2 blocks east of the new police station, is not nearly as convenient as land they own today, contiguous to the new station. Furthermore, the Civic Center land is much more valuable than their other parcels. I turn now to the primary premise of my remarks. How can we best enhance the investment of the citizens of Oklahoma City in the Civic Center and its adjacent park? There are other practical issues contained in the proposal. 2 parking bays of 2 opposing 18-foot deep spaces, as are specified, separated by a 28-foot aisle. If one does the math, this results in a 128-foot wide scheme. Add 2 feet for structure, and they have a 130-foot wide building on a 125-foot wide lot. As presently configured, the site isn't wide enough. As there are no openings in the east and west concrete walls, there's a strong possibility that mechanical ventilation will be required, which will negatively impact the garage's economic pro forma. I totally agree with the proposed 18 by 28 by 18 parking grid, as large pickup trucks or SUVs are beginning to dominate and congest our garages. Many of these vehicles measure 6.5 to 7 feet wide and 19 feet in length. Let's turn now to the primary premise of my remarks. How can we best enhance the investment of the citizens of Oklahoma City in the Civic Center and its adjacent park? The city has recently invested $53 million in the Civic Center Music Hall. Further, an OKC investment of several $1 million more is in the pipeline. Under the superb guidance of Elizabeth Gray, we are enjoying the best musical theater in the history of Oklahoma. But where does one go following a performance to complete the experience? We are well aware of the after-theater experiences available near New York City's 42nd Street in the Theater District. I believe that we could develop a similar experience immediately south of the Civic Center by creating 1 parcel for development from the Main Street Arcade east to the Williams Box Law Office. Our vision would encourage a rich mix of small food and beverage options, coupled with a jazz club, art galleries, etc., retail on the lower levels. This would offer opportunities for small offices, artist studios, and retail, all topped off with 3 to 5 stories of residential uses to provide a 24-hour life to the district. Balconies similar to the Box family could look out at the park. People, not police cars, should be enjoying this park, where we've invested $5 million of taxpayers' money. Careful attention to the streetscape on both Main and Colcord would be developed within the 180 guidelines. We believe the city could provide leadership for this concept by adding to their existing ownership via land swaps, outright purchases, and condemnation, if necessary, to ultimately create the development parcel. This could then be turned over to the very capable Kathy O'Connor to do her magic in seeking development of proposals from the community. This could present a win-win proposition for both the Police Association and the city. The Police Association should locate their garage on land they currently own conveniently adjacent to the police station. The city should insist on completing the Grand Civic Center District with this development, which would introduce life and vitality to this Colcord Main Street opportunity. In closing, the garage proposal is inappropriate on several fronts. is entirely out of scale with existing two-story buildings. It is an inappropriate land use for our civic center investments, and if built, would destroy a terrific opportunity to capitalize on our $58 million investment. I trust that this committee will see the potential of this opportunity and that you will vote no and begin the process of a win-win solution for all of us. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I'd like to ask former Planning Commissioner Nick Gales to step forward to make some brief remarks, and then following him, former City Councilman Pete White. Mr. Gales.
Morning. Nick Gales, 12504 Kingsbrook Road. A lot's been said this morning, some of which I had planned to say, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. I spoke with you before, well, on the previous application, about the background of the guidelines, what they were meant to do. One thing I didn't tell you then, through oversight, was when we were considering these guidelines, they were put together thinking about redevelopment of large areas. We weren't saying single lot this, single lot that. Now we have before us another application, which is essentially the same application we saw before with a little architectural lipstick or window dressing and cutting off a story. It's still a parking garage. It's still where it is. 5 stories is still not appropriate surrounding area. I gave you a handout before showing a picture, and I believe it's over there on the wall as an exhibit, of what not to do. That's a 5 or 6 story building sandwiched up against a 1-story building. What we have here, I sat out there this morning and looked at it before I came. We have 1 and 2 story buildings, primarily 2-story. We want to stick a 5-story building up there. It simply doesn't fit. Still doesn't fit. The comments that were made earlier about investment, Mr. Williams has an investment, Mr. Box has an investment. Well, guess what? You have an investment too. I have an investment. I still represent the city on tax increment financing oversight. City's putting money in the arcade to bring it back to what it was, not to tear it down and redevelop this block, but to reinvest in the block. They've already talked about Civic Center investment. We've put a great deal in Civic Center through MAPS. We're about to put more money in it through the bond issue. Obviously, the park. So we all have an investment in this. Think about that for a minute. The applicant said we follow the guidelines and we follow the zoning code. Yes. Zoning code provides for many uses. That's what we do on the Planning Commission. We set zoning districts. But that doesn't mean that every one of those uses is appropriate for every site in that district. We're simply taking a broad brush if we adopt that. That's part of why this committee exists. Planning Commission set the zoning and the zoning in the district. If we're saying everything, every use in there is acceptable by right, what are you guys here for? I don't know. This is not an acceptable by right deal. This is exercise discretion, apply the guidelines. They are there for that reason. They are guidelines. And I would encourage you to apply those guidelines. My last comment would be probably paraphrase the infamous Johnny Cochran quote, if it doesn't fit,
I'm Pete White, 2200 Shadow Lake Drive, Oklahoma City.
Actually, could we pause for a second? Is there a time that this committee could reconvene? Because we're approaching 10:45 right now to finish this.
A time today, is that or a time tomorrow?
I would personally not be able to reconvene after 12 o'clock. And given the MAPS meeting at 11, that would not work for me today.
I will promise you I'll keep my remarks
Well,
to just 2 or 3 minutes.
The committee itself hasn't even
No, I understand.
expressed their comments or deliberated yet, and I wouldn't want to, after everyone in the galleries had their chance to speak, I wouldn't want to cut the committee short of their comments and input.
I'm just not going to be able to come back this afternoon because of an ACOG meeting. I mean, I'm literally 2 minutes, I promise.
Well, it's not just you, so we're trying to make this work for everybody that's involved.
Okay.
So one option is for us to continue it to next month, which I'm sure is not the favorite of most people in the room, but I actually just don't really see another practical way to do it. But that's where I would lean if I were to make a motion. But is that a proper way to approach it?
Yes, it's extremely hard to schedule special meetings because of all the variables of schedule and room, and we are losing 2 days next week.
Do you have a sense yet if we have a full schedule otherwise?
We have one case.
Mr. Chairman, myself and Mr. Box are willing to terminate our presentations immediately in order to provide time for Kent Gilliland, who represents the applicant, to make a closing statement, and then you can vote. But we'll ask Mr. White to step down. Mr. Box won't speak. Other neighboring property owners won't speak in order for you to take a vote today.
Well, we can take that approach and continue on. Again, this committee has not yet deliberated themselves.
I understand.
And so,
For what it's worth, as somebody who's on the MAPS board, we have in the past waited, 15 minutes. I mean, that's not completely out of the, I don't know how staff feels about that, but it's happened before, and people, the world still rotates about its axis.
The next meeting convenes at 11. We need to be out at 11.
Well, we disagree. Why does that committee get to usurp an important decision like this? This affects people's rights. The committee that's about to meet that has very important people on it, that's an advisory committee. They can't wait 15 minutes?
we're not here to judge which meeting takes precedent over the other. We're simply applying to the schedule that's currently in place based on the Thanksgiving holiday. It's just a matter of fact at this point.
But you don't have to relinquish this room. If you continue your hearing, they'll wait. They're courteous people.
We appreciate your willingness to terminate the rest of your presentation, and we will continue with this meeting right now and revisit as the time becomes necessary.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. My name is Kent Gilliland. I'm the attorney for the applicant. I'm with Hall Estill Law Firm in Oklahoma City. My address is 100 North Broadway, Suite 2900. And I promise to keep this very, very short. Thank you. I've lived in Oklahoma City my entire life. Love Oklahoma City, had opportunities to leave Oklahoma City, and I've chosen not to. It's hard for me to believe And I am so proud of the city, and that's why I haven't left. It's hard for me to believe that a 200 parking garage built in this location is going to determine the future of this city. The fact of the matter is, height and compatibility are determined issues. We have no choice but to build a project that's at least 50 feet high. That's virtually what we've done in this instance. It doesn't matter what is built at this particular site. It has to be 50 feet high unless the developer wants to go seek a variance from the Board of Adjustment. We have no choice, whether it's a parking garage, an office building, a medical building, an apartment, or a bingo parlor. It has to be 50 feet high. So that's what we've done, is we built a parking garage that's 50 feet high. We can't go any lower, so we haven't. We haven't gone particularly higher. We're 6 feet higher on the Main Street side, not on the Park side. So to me, the height issue is stipulated. We have no choice. That's just the way it is. You get over to the compatibility and use issue, I think use is a slam dunk. I think if you look at the municipal councilor's memo, they'll tell you that this isn't a matter of land use. Use has already been determined. If you go to the zoning table, it ought to be stipulated. The protestants have acknowledged that the use is permitted. Oklahoma City staff has acknowledged that the use is permitted. We acknowledge it. City councilor has acknowledged that the use is permitted. So you get down to this issue of compatibility. If you refer to the building typology compatibility matrix in the framework, and you go down to the parking garage and the commercial corridor, it is already designated that a parking garage is a compatible use. It doesn't go through and describe that other uses are fully compatible. Some it describes as being potentially compatible. Maybe that's where the compatibility discussion is more important. But here, a parking garage is designated in the framework as a compatible use. It's already been used once in front of the City Hall with the Arts District parking garage. I don't know why that park doesn't deserve the same respect that Bicentennial Park would deserve. A parking garage was built in that spot. In fact, that particular parking garage is also in the commercial corridor. It's also next to a historical building, has the same mixed-use category. It's also on a park. In fact, it's even more directly in front of a park than this parking garage is. This parking garage really faces Channing Drive. It doesn't face Bicentennial Park. And this parking garage is smaller in scale. To say that the protestants who own 1 to 2 story buildings can determine the future of the development in this area is an illogical conclusion. In effect, what that would do is basically repeal the zoning ordinances and framework that have been in place. This committee doesn't have the jurisdiction to do that. Many of the issues that have been raised by the protestants today, those were issues for the City Council years ago. When the framework was adopted, those were issues at that time. The framework was put into place. We're complying 100% with the framework. Land use for this particular purpose is not an issue. We appreciate everybody's concern about the economics of the police association building the parking garage. The fact of the matter is, we own the property. This is the way we want to develop. We're willing to take the economic risk of developing the property the way we want to. We would invite the adjoining landowners to develop their property with a residential or mixed use. That would be awesome, and we're happy to provide parking for them. But this is our property. No one else has the right to develop our property. So we ought to be able to develop the property the way the law provides. We have to have some sort of sense of fairness and law that applies so that people have something to rely on and we're not subject to some arbitrary and capricious decision of what others want. We have complied 100% at this point. We've submitted a revised application to address certain concerns. We think we have fully respected at this point the Civic Center. And if there are certain design guidelines that we need to address for the committee's purpose, we're more than happy to discuss those design guidelines. But I think that's where we're at this point. So I appreciate Mr. Williams. That was a magnanimous offer. Very nice. Appreciate him doing that. I'm going to cut it off there, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Bill Shadid. I have 5623 Northwestern. I am an attorney, but I'm here on my own. I think that was pretty misleading what you just heard. If you read the memorandum from your attorney, Kenneth Jordan, Susan Randall, it says, however, the DDRC has been vested with legal authority and discretion under the DBD development guidelines to decide whether a 5-story parking garage as now proposed and designed is consistent and compatible with and appropriate to the specific site. So when he tells you you have no choice, you have a choice. Is this compatible? And when I listened to the presenter, he said what they're doing is compatible to future development. That's what this argument's about. It is not. But don't think you have to follow anything. You have discretion. That's why you're here.
Does the committee have any comments?
I wanted to start off by saying I absolutely agree with the discretion line of thinking, because if we didn't have discretion, then you would just plug in an application into some software and it would spit out a result. So since we exist, since we're on this board, clearly there is a discretion. Maybe it's 1%, maybe it's 10%, even if it's 0.1%, that's why we exist. So absolutely, the laws are there, the ordinances are there, but there's still, the framework is there, but there's still a judgment aspect. And so for me, I'm a no. I would move. I want to hear from everybody else, but I would make a motion to reject the application. And to me, it's not a matter of the design of it, because really the arguments haven't been about the design. I mean, it hasn't really been about the kind of material exactly, and it's really been about to have a parking garage or not. And in that location, facing the park, I absolutely agree with the compatibility of use. And for what it's worth, I think I'm the one member of the committee who has no special skill. I'm just the citizen who makes observations. I'm not an architect. I'm not a developer. So as somebody who does everything everything in my life, where I live, where I work, where my kids go to school, I go to the Civic Center all the time. I spend about 90% of my life within a half-mile radius of here. It's kind of my neighborhood too. I'm a downtowner myself, and I absolutely understand the eyes on the park argument, and I want to see, mixed-use development that revolves around people and not around vehicles on that park. Maybe a block away is a totally different story, but as far as facing the park, that's very, very important to me. So that's where I come down on this.
I agree, and for the reasons similar to what I said last time. I do not take exception to the height. I think the height is minimum 50, and it could be higher, and higher height on this lot, I think, could be successful. I've been looking at some of the graphics, and I noticed since the last meeting a couple of things. Yes, this is in medium density flex, but it has two functions, one on each side. And so those two sides have two totally different contexts. And I'm looking at this, there is no debate about the Main Street side. That's not come up for any reason. And if we were basing this on the use alone, we would be discussing both sides, but we're basing it on compatibility and context. And I think with respect to the park, compatibility and context is the same issue for me as it was last time. When it comes to the other parking garage that was referenced, and it is still in the corridor, but it is on high-density property. So it is a different scenario. It's not the same scenario that was previously approved. It is a different scenario for that specific case. So for me, it comes back to compatibility with the park itself. That's the way that I would vote. But I would like to hear.
Okay, I've taken copious notes here, lots and lots, but it comes down to, as far as the arguments about future use and how we would all like it to be developed, I find if residential could be a good use, but they do own it. So I think what we need to be looking at today is their intended use. However, I have to look at the investment the city has made in the park and the civic center, and whether this is compatible and consistent with that park and that investment, and I don't think it is, so I will have to be voting no.
And I actually fall on the other side. I do not believe that this garage is incompatible with this location as part of the urban fabric. I think the design moves that have been made since the last application certainly help with its compatibility within this location. I do believe that and would like to see residential development in this area in downtown, and I would strongly encourage the current property owners around the park and around this building, and potentially other people to acquire those properties and to develop residential around it. But that does not preclude this current application and what's being proposed. So I would actually vote to, I would vote to approve this application.
So I've got to ask you, Corey, with all due respect, the idea of car storage, which is really what they are presenting, you would find that compatible on the park?
It's both parking and it is commercial as well. This building's been presented throughout this meeting as a parking garage, but it's actually mixed use in that it has commercial retail at the base. And commercial retail is something that would enhance the park. There was a comment about a convenience store, and I actually think, done well, a convenience store would be good for the park. I've spent time in parks and needed to go get a bottle of water and get a drink, and a convenience store at the edge of the park would be beneficial to me to go get a drink and return to the park. So I don't see this as purely parking. I see this as mixed use, and the ground level treatment is an amenity to the park, depending on what that retail is.
Of course, I always respect what you have to say, and you actually got me thinking differently about the convenience store part. That is true, but I still come down on the side of, I think it's clear from, well, the presentation and the design and the intent that it is certainly vast majority just car storage, and maybe there'd be some attempt at commercial development. But so I still kind of come down on that side. So, so in the interest of, well, I want to go ahead and offer a motion with that in mind, and move to deny the application. Do I have to read all the words and say all the fancy things? Because if we're just denying it, then I just say move to deny the application. Yes?
You probably need to state the reasons why.
Okay.
Design, and it should be based upon the design of the garage itself and how that is not compatible.
Yeah, so based on the lack of compatibility of use.
A second.
There was a Harding-Kriegel motion. All those in favor say aye.
No, because they're voting. Presentations are over, are they not?
Yeah, somebody did say their vote out loud.
Did you already vote? There's a motion in a second.
I said the word.
And did you vote?
I just want to ask...
This would be improper procedure, Mr. Chairman. The debate is over, the motion is made, the committee is ready to vote, and if Mr. Dedman is permitted to make a presentation, then we'll want to rebut it, and we're short on time. So I ask that you deny them any additional presentation.
I think you should vote. There's a motion in a second.
We have a motion
So how do
and a
we
second.
make a...
Do we have a ruling on this?
We have a motion and a second, and all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, myself nay. The motion passes 3-1. We have other business on the docket, item 7A. Do we need an official motion, or is that something that... We will address this item at our next meeting, which is December 21st, 2017. Meeting adjourned.